Welcome to She Said Homestead, the podcast that explores homesteading from a range of perspectives. We're Sage and Michaela, two homesteaders, each with unique experiences, properties, and future goals for our homesteads. We're discussing various homesteading topics, sharing our personal experiences as women working full-time who are managing homesteads as well, and shining a light on the stories of other inspiring homesteaders.
Before we dive in, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. And if you enjoy our podcast, please consider leaving a review. It really helps us grow and share these homesteading stories with even more people.
Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast. I'm Sage from Terra Nova Acres.
And I'm Michaela from Calico Cow Acres, and we both have homesteads in Western North Carolina.
Today, we're going to be talking all about garden planning because that's where our heads are at. But before we get into that, why don't you tell me a little bit about your week?
Are our heads in that area?
As of like 24 hours ago, because we were recording this. Yeah, that's where my headspace is at now.
I've had a pretty random week of things, but I guess the most prominent thing is our first snow event that we had yesterday into today. That's the first time it snowed here since we've lived here. And it was really exciting to see our property covered in snow because it's not something that I was sure was ever going to happen. So I got like a ton of footage of it. I got to try out my new camera that I got for vlogging yesterday out in the snow with all the animals and stuff, and captured some pretty cool little snippets of them interacting with snow for the first time. I got a canning shelf up in the basement. Taylor helped me put that up. He built it, one of the two that we're going to put down there. And I have yet to put anything on it because I always think that when he's gone, I'm going to get stuff done. But I truly, like, he's gone right now, back up to Michigan for the weekend. And I truly go into, like, keep the animals alive and keep myself alive mode. And that's all that gets done, especially with the snow, because I'm, like, having to deal with water issues and making sure everybody's happy and safe out there. Our water heater went out earlier this week, and that was the thing that we had to deal with. And by we, I mean Taylor. But I had to deal with it with the fact that I couldn't shower for a few days, and that was frustrating. And now it's like extra hot, so that's cool. I keep burning myself. We need to turn the temperature down, but again, he's not here. I started a new sourdough starter. So I'm going to be baking some sourdough and trying to get back into that because it's been so long. My friend Megan sent me her dehydrated starter. So I don't know what hers is named, but mine has always been named Dolores, and she is back in action. Other than that, I've been still trying to edit my 2-year video. I'm still like way behind on trying to get that done. It's taking so freaking long, but I've been diligently working on it for almost a month now, and I'm really ready for it to be done.
So when you make bread with that starter, do you usually make the traditional sourdough, or do you turn maybe recipes that wouldn't ordinarily be sourdough recipes into sourdough? How do you usually use it?
It's been such a long time since I've made anything sourdough. I feel like I am more of the person who uses like discard recipes than traditional sourdough loaves. But when I do make a sourdough loaf, I usually cut it, like I'll slice it up and I'll keep it in the freezer because Taylor doesn't really like sourdough, like the bread itself, because it's just like too strong of a flavor for him. So it's usually just me eating it if I'm making bread. So I'll just keep it in the freezer and toast it up whenever I'm wanting it. But I like to do crackers, and I always add the discard to my recipes. And I experimented with it the day after I rehydrated hers, and usually it takes like a week. And I subbed it in my like normal yeasted like artisan loaf recipe. And it actually turned out really, really well. Like, I was surprised that it rehydrated so quickly. And when I mixed it together, it was probably like a third of a pint jar. And within like a few hours, the whole thing was full. That's how active it was. So it's a good starter. Yeah, that's all I did this week. What were you up to this week?
It has also been very cold here. We got snow, but the bigger deal has been that it's gotten below freezing and stayed below freezing for a while now, which we get cold temperatures, but usually it'll at least get above 32, 34 during the day, and it has not. And so with all of the recent well issues, I've been like, I am dripping my water every night. I'm not letting this freeze because if my pipes freeze, it's not gonna thaw until like next week. So I've been very diligent about that. And then the well had issues anyway because of something that's probably electric, and it's a shared well, and I think the issue is actually at my neighbor's house. It's not at my house. This whole saga that seems to never end. But then also because there were well issues, then like air got in the line, which then got in my water heater. So I've also had water heater issues. I had to call my poor neighbor who moved in like 2 weeks ago and be like, "Hey, can you help me with the water heater? Also, can you turn the well off so it stops overflowing into my crawl space?" So yeah, I'm very grateful for him. I think he's probably very tired of me. But he did help me, and my water heater is back working, and I've been able to take a shower. So I'm happy. I also woke up one day this week with just a pulled or strained muscle in my leg for like no reason. I don't know what I did, but I guess I'm in my 30s now, and that's just what my life is. I wake up and my body is on strike. So it was a muscle. I don't know anatomy, but it was whatever muscle you use to like pick your leg up to walk. So I was just kind of like moving my hip, just like hobbling, um, to the point that my neighbor stopped by and was like, "Are you okay? You good? Do you need any help?" Uh, but thankfully, I feel much better today after slipping and sliding in the snow. Glad it didn't get worse, but there's still time for it to come back with a vengeance. So I'll knock on wood before I really call myself better. And then I finally I've been working on kind of getting my energy back up and doing the million tiny little random projects I have. So I'd been staring at my fruit wines that needed to be racked off of their sediment and staring at my apple scrap vinegar that needed to be dealt with. And I did both of those this week, so I'm very proud of myself. Yay. Gold star. Gold star for me for finally doing that. A couple months behind schedule, but better late than never.
For research purposes, how are you working on getting your energy back up? Because I need to know.
Patience, which is a really, really annoying answer, but that's the only answer I have.
I was really hoping you were going to say like taking naps or something.
I have been going to bed. I've been getting very tired at like 10:30 and going to bed, which maybe that sounds like the time that normal people should go to bed. But for me, my natural circadian rhythm is always like midnight, 12:30. And I've been getting tired and I'm like, what is this? Which again, maybe that's just I'm in my 30s now and this is life.
You're in your 30s and it's January. I think that's it.
Oh no. Oh no.
And you pull the muscle. You can't go on.
And then another one of those million tiny projects has been to actually go through my seeds. So I did my seed shopping months ago and then got them and then pretty much immediately forgot what I got. I went through them last night because it is the time to start thinking about all that stuff and going back through my list of all of my different things that I need to start and the timeline that I'm starting them on, my seed starting schedule. But then also remembering what I got this year so that I could kind of clear out my existing collection and know what seeds I replace so that I can toss old seeds or know like, oh, I'm going to try this variety this year, so this can go. Because they're sitting next to me if you're watching the video. Just this binder is my vegetables. Which if you're not watching, it's like the bigger of the standard binders that you can get, and it is bursting at the seams. So organizing that was a priority because I can't just keep all of these seeds. It's too much. But it's a good segue into today's topic, which is garden planning.
I finally broke down this year and got a tote, like a Rubbermaid tote to put them in, because I have the like photo boxes and stuff, and I've had them in various cardboard boxes, like the photo boxes just stacked inside of a cardboard box, and I always bring it out to the garden and it gets wet and dirty. My cardboard box broke. So I was like, I'm gonna get a tote, invest that $8.
Do you love it? Has it been life changing?
Well, I mean, not yet. I think it's going to be, but I recently couldn't walk into my office because there's so much crap in there right now from like renovation and holidays and stuff. And I kept tripping over those boxes because they fell out of the box that broke. And so I just took a tote that we got, because we got a handful of them, and I chucked all of those freaking seed boxes in there. And I was like, I'm sick of you. I'm not looking at you for another week. But we're gonna have a talk then. I was like, I'm over these stupid little boxes. So binder is a good thought, but I like to shuffle through them, so I feel like it wouldn't work as well for me, but I don't know. To each their own.
Yeah, everybody has their system that works for them. If anyone's curious, I have them in a binder, and you just get I don't know what they're called, but they're like sheet protectors that are meant for photographs.
Yeah,
and I find that those just work really well with my brain because I can flip through. I don't have to have a bunch of loose seed packets, which immediate anxiety. Oh my god. I can flip through, I can take out what I need and leave the rest organized, and that works for me.
I like having the loose seed packets because I like to be able to put my hands on them. Trying to like mess with getting them into the sleeves would frustrate me. So it's very personal. Seed storage is a very, very personal thing.
To each their own sensory overwhelm.
Yeah.
Big question here. Do you feel like you're actually ready to start thinking about 2025 garden planning and starting seeds?
Absolutely not. Normally, I would say yes, but something about this past year just like drained all of the life out of me, and it's lingering exhaustion. Like I know I need to do it. I have things on the calendar. I know when stuff needs to go in the garden. I know where it's going to go. I don't know where I'm going to find the energy to do it though. That's the one outlier. And I feel like I already know the answer, but how about you?
I'm kind of undecided, honestly. Like I was just talking about, up until this point, I've just been burnt out, and I have said that in the weekly recap every day for like 3 months. And I'm seeing the light at the end of the tunnel with that, of like, I'm not feeling worse. I'm feeling a little bit better. Like maybe I can start to think that like this is the beginning of the momentum for this year, maybe. But I was also thinking back to last year and being like, man, I feel like I was in such a better place last January to be actually like doing things. But I don't know. That could be me being nostalgic about last year and overwhelmed about this year. So I feel like I'm just now entering into the space where I'm like, okay, I can start looking at this. I can start thinking about it. And when I got into it last night, it didn't feel forced, which is kind of what I was anticipating. So that was a pleasant surprise.
I think that part of it for me is just sort of a little bit of anxiety about being able to accomplish some things out there this year, because 2022, or no, I lied. 2023, I'm sorry, I'm still thinking is 2024. I guess a year and a half ago, like that summer, I think that I got COVID. And like after Taylor came home from a work trip, I think he brought it home and gave it to me. And ever since then, I've had breathing issues and they've gotten worse. And now I like officially have asthma, like diagnosed. And I think there are other lingering issues from that too. And so like my heart rate goes up really, really quickly, really easily now. And like even just walking up the stairs, I'm like out of breath and my heart's racing. And so the thought of having to do garden tasks in the heat is like really kind of scaring me. And so I'm really trying to lean into like the winter weather and doing as much as I can out there when it's nice and cool. I think that's part of the like hesitation for me with the like not being fully ready for it. Like I'm excited mentally, but I'm also nervous. And so I've also just kind of put off the planning aspect of things a little bit more this year. Like earlier in the summer, like August or whatever, I got an idea of where I wanted things to go, and I ordered all my seeds early. So that was all taken care of, but I really need to go back through them and reorient myself, because I typically plan, like, planning is its whole own activity for me. Like, I enjoy garden planning as a winter hobby, not just like a let's get this done and move on thing. And this year it's just been leave it up to chance. I'm am I a chaos gardener now? I don't know.
I remember when we recorded a year ago, maybe more than a year ago now, we were talking about the seasonality of homesteading in one of our first podcast episodes. And I remember you bringing up garden planning as something that you really enjoy. So it's different. It's a contrast for me to hear you say, like, oh no, I just don't know if I can muster the almost emotional energy with everything that's around it to plan, because you just don't know how things are going to play out.
Yeah, and I mean, I like there are other aspects of it. It's not just like, am I going to be able to accomplish this like physically this year? I still haven't taken down my Christmas tree, and it's mid-January. Like, it's just in general, like general exhaustion. I feel like I'm behind on all of the things. So garden planning has, as much as I would like to like squeeze it in there and be on my computer while we're like sitting down at night and work on that, it's just I felt the urge more to just like be present and hang out with Taylor at night and not be like on my computer, in addition to the amount of time I'm on the computer like all day long working. I don't know what it is, but I've been like not interested in that lately. So I'm curious this year with you as well, because I know that garden planning isn't like your most favorite thing. You're more of the like utilitarian when it comes to garden planning.
Okay. It's a new label for me, but I'll take it. I don't know. I feel like garden planning for me has changed every year that I've been here. So the first year when I was looking at garden planning, I was doing all the things. I was researching exactly how much spacing each thing needed. I was figuring out the length and width of all of my rows. I was like, okay, broccoli is here, and tomatoes are here, and peppers are here. That was the first year, because I had gardened a little bit, but never on this scale. So there were just things that I didn't know. And so I felt like I needed to equip myself with all of that mental preparation before I did it. And then the second year, it got a little more relaxed, and I was like, eh. And then the third year, it was even more relaxed. And now going into my fourth growing season here, I'm kind of like, especially having the greenhouse now, where like previously the biggest constraint around all of that was my seed starting space. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure I'll find a way to run out of space in the greenhouse too. But at least the scale that I'm used to working at, and I have 3 acres, and I have people who garden too. So it's like if I start too many, I'll just give it to somebody else who's gonna grow it. So it's all vibes at this point, plus my Excel spreadsheet that I've had from the beginning and that I continue to work off of for actual seed starting dates.
So do you just have dates in your seed starting spreadsheet then? Like, is that mostly what you keep track of? It's not like the locations of stuff specifically and varieties and everything?
No, unless there's a reason that the variety would change my seed starting date. For example, like a slicing tomato versus a paste tomato, I might start those at different times because the slicers take so much longer to start producing. Unless it's something like that, I don't really track it that way. So my seed starting setup looks something to the extent of peppers. Here's the date to start them as seeds. Here's roughly when they should be transplanted out. Eggplant, same thing. Tomatoes, same thing. And it's organized by what I start first, and then as you go down the list, it's things that get started later and later. Because because I transplant pretty much everything. There's very few things that I direct sow because it's just so it works for me. But yeah, that's kind of the only like informational piece that really goes into it. And I made it a while ago, so I just adjust whatever the frost date is for this year, and that's pretty much it. That's the extent of my logistical planning.
I think that with it being our third year here, it's starting to feel more like intuitive. Like I don't need the full spreadsheet. I definitely needed it the first couple of years because I'm growing so like on such a large scale here. Like this garden is massive. And so just even being able to pull open my phone and look at the little bit of a sketch layout I have of our garden, and like I just have in Google Sheets like the layout of our garden beds. They're not to scale or anything, and I just have like generally what I wanted to put in them, and I just copy that every year, and that's still going to be really helpful. But this year I don't need the full spreadsheet to know when to start things, unless there might be a couple things that I'm trying for the first time that I like need to look up and see when they should be started. But like I know that I need to start my onions in January. I know how early I need to start my peppers, how early I need to start my tomatoes. Like at this point, that's intuitive to me. So I think that's something that's really changed for me, especially this year. Maybe that's why I'm not like so gung-ho about garden planning, because I kind of just know what I need to do right now. I'm more interested in like preparing myself to actually do the starting of the seeds and stuff instead of the hobby of planning, because I already just like I have it down.
That's really interesting. Also, intuitive is a great word for it. But that's interesting that you don't feel like you need that list, that you feel like it's just kind of ingrained in you at this point when you need to start things. I am not usually someone who like really needs to be regimented about stuff, which even if I tried, fail. But I definitely need that list. I need that list to be my brain, because if I didn't have that with all the dates and all the things, and if I didn't organize my seed binders by what I start first and be able to go that way, I would be constantly so anxious that I was forgetting something, and I would drive myself into a frenzy just constantly running that in the background of my mind. So for me to be able to focus on anything else, I need to have it written down so that I can say, okay, check mark here. I can wipe my hands of it in my brain.
That's fair. I mean, I still have it like on my Asana board, a general like note that says 6 or 8 weeks. I can't remember what I put it on this year, but on this date, start all your tomatoes. On this date, start all your peppers. I think I have some on there for transplanting too, but it's just stuff that like I don't need to look up everything this year, I guess, because I just kind of remember. So I can just go into my calendar, my Asana board thing that I use to track everything I do in life, and I can say, hey, this day I know that I need to start this, so that I generally know that like this week is when this should be started, or I'm going to be too late on things. And it's just, I just feel different in the aspect where like I don't feel like I need to look every single detail up about things this year. Like I'm starting to learn the ins and outs of it without having to Google it to remember.
Isn't that a cool feeling? I love that.
Yes. I know we've talked about it before in terms of like just knowing random facts about plants and like being able to identify random plants in nature. And it's cool to start experiencing it for the garden planning specifically and the stuff that's growing in my garden. The greenhouse, however, is probably going to throw a wrench in all of my knowledge, I feel like, because it's like a different growing space, and like what I'm going to be able to grow and when might change because of the extra space that I have out there. And yeah, so that might be a little bit of a wrench, not in my plans, but just in my knowledge. Like it's going to be a new thing to tackle for sure.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess for me, and I won't know until I get into it, like with anything, but I feel like for me, I don't think the greenhouse will change the timeline of much, which I say that now, famous last words. But it's more like the volume of what I can start. So typically my food takes priority over the flowers and things. But because I only have so much room, then I'm not starting the flowers on the optimal timeline, which means their bloom window is shorter if they get started later. So, especially with dahlias, is what I'm actually really excited for, to have the greenhouse, because I can start them way earlier. Like, for example, this year I got a couple months of bloom time off of them. It's not a ton. But if I have the greenhouse and I can get them like pre-sprouting inside and even take cuttings of those sprouts and turn them into more dahlias, which don't need that, but I'm gonna do it anyway.
I need more
That's where
dahlias.
my mind goes with the greenhouse. It's volume, especially at one time, because I feel like at 4 weeks before frost is when I have pretty much everything started, and the stuff that I started early is really big, and that's when things are the most crowded.
Yeah, I'm definitely planning to use it for some like winter sown things, like the flowers that like the cooler weather, if we can get it up in time. I'm really wanting to get stuff out there sooner because right now our basement's like hot at night because we have the wood stove going, and so that's just gonna like mess with all of the temperature and how dry things are down there. So I'm gonna try and start as little stuff as possible in the basement. As much as they'll probably like peppers and tomatoes will probably like it, I'll probably still start those down there, but I'm gonna like I've mentioned before, I have issues with like the cats trying to pee in my potting soil, and I can't close them out of the basement because their litter boxes are down there, and it's just, yeah. I forget to water things when they're in the basement because I don't go down there on a regular basis for other things, and I'm not going to remember to water my plants if they're down there, even if I set myself a timer to do so. Trust me, I've tried. But I do go out into the garden every single day, like multiple times a day, because I'm taking care of the birds and checking on them. And the hoses out there, I can water things easier out there. So I'm thinking that that's going to change how just everything in general works for seed starting for me.
So with the greenhouse, once you get it set up, do you think that all of that will be dedicated to seed starting space? Do you think you'll do anything in ground? What's the proportionality? What's the plan for that?
I'm probably not going to do anything in ground in there, but I do plan to have some. I have 2 small raised beds. I might put one of those at least, if not both of them, in there. They're like 2 feet by 5 feet, I think. And I might try and do some tomatoes in there just as an experiment. Yeah, like I might do some tomato beds with some other stuff randomly mixed in there, stuff that I know likes the heat. Maybe I'll pop a pepper plant in there. I might put, I thought about this previously. I can't remember what else I was thinking about. Eucalyptus? Maybe a couple flowers. I don't know. Stuff that likes to be hot because it's definitely going to get hot in my garden because there's not any shade out there now. And then my citrus. I have a few citrus trees that we usually put in the basement in the winter, and I think I'm going to risk it and see if they are going to stay alive out in the greenhouse in the winter, because usually our temperatures are kind of just below what's okay with them, what's okay for them. And we're on the edge, like we're technically zone 8A now. And I think that if I keep them in the greenhouse, even without any heat at night, like heat, supplemental heat, and if I have like the mass, geothermal mass, I guess, in there, like a black tub of water, things like that, in there to like radiate heat as well as like the stones that we're gonna put in there to the stone countertops as the floor. I think that those should be fine out there. So that's gonna be something we experiment with. I might lose some citrus plants, we'll see. But it's definitely not gonna be just seed starting. I think I mentioned before I'm also gonna put I'm gonna have Taylor put posts out there so I can have a hammock. I want it to be like a multifunctional space.
I think for me, I might try to put a eucalyptus tree in there, or maybe a fig. I have a fig tree that's a cutting from a fig tree that my dad has that was a cutting from a fig tree that my grandmother had, and I'm like just on the border of where they don't really do well. Like they'll grow back from the roots, but they're more of a shrub than a tree where I am. But if I could put that in a place, I mean, obviously I'd have to trim it back. But if I could put that in a place where it stays just a little bit warmer, it would do really well. And then eucalyptus, I love it. It's great as a filler for flower bouquets, and it is a tree. It will come back, but it's also very sensitive. And so if I want to grow it, I have to grow it as an annual, and then I get like one flush of it at the very end of summer. So even if all I have is this tiny little tree to pull off of just here and there, I think I'd still really enjoy that. But other than that, my vision is for it to be pretty much just a seed starting space. What I'm most excited about is that having that kind of space will allow me to batch my seed starting efforts more, which will reduce overwhelm. Because if I can do a really big task but do it all at once, that's a lot easier for me than doing it every single week for whatever reason, just how my brain is wired. That is 5 tasks, for example, doing it once a week for 5 weeks, than just like spending 5 hours doing it once. It's hard for me to muster up the energy to break that metaphorical coefficient of friction all the time. So I really do think, even though it's a bigger space and potentially a bigger volume of stuff, I think it's actually gonna help me be less stressed out.
I fully agree with that. I'm the same way with like having the thing repeatedly on my to-do list causes chaos in my brain. I'm like, I hate this. I really just want to get it all done. I wish I could start all of the seeds in one go and be done with it. Unfortunately, that's not how it works. But I think also just the thought of starting seeds out in a greenhouse and sitting in the greenhouse and being outside and being able to see the outside and being in the light, that sounds way more enjoyable and much more like I will actually do it than if I have to walk down to my basement that I can barely see in because it's so dark. So you're going to use the greenhouse for seed starting and maybe a couple tree things. What is the high tunnel plan?
If I can get it up in time for the season, which is a maybe, the goal with that really is to have a space where I can try to grow tomatoes without so much fungal interference. In the southeast, this is just something that you're going to battle with kind of no matter what, because it's so humid here. And the high tunnel, in theory, will help that because it acts as a shield for all that rain. So tomatoes really love their roots to be wet, but when their leaves are wet because we get so much rain and because it's so humid, that's where a lot of the fungal issues come into play. So I'm hoping that I can put them in there and keep some of the water off of their leaves and have healthier plants. No idea if that's going to pan out, and that does mean that I need to figure out what on earth to use as the trellises for that, because I invested hundreds of dollars into trellises where I used to have them, and I don't necessarily want to take that down. I'd like to just use that for other things. So I don't know, probably scavenge wood from around the property and do something for relatively free if I can manage. And then in the off season, when it's not full of tomatoes, I'd love to try to use that space more in winter for the cold hardy things. Or in the winter, I could put my chickens in there and have them keep warm. I don't fully have a definitive plan for it. I have some brainstormy ideas right now, but I am pretty emotionally attached to the thought of tomatoes in there in summer.
So are you planning to use the high tunnel in conjunction with your low tunnels too, or are you going to try and phase those out and use the high tunnel more?
So the low tunnels I use for frost protection, but also insect protection. And if I have a high tunnel that can serve that frost protection purpose, then I might dedicate the low tunnels to stuff like my squash, keeping bugs off of that, or keeping chickens out, because that's a continual problem that I have in the cooler weather when the chickens are roaming around a little bit more freely. So I don't think I will phase the low tunnels out. I think I will change what I use them for And even in that high tunnel, I would still likely use Agrabah, but I like to use it as a blanket. I find that it works better as a blanket instead of a low tunnel covering, if that makes sense. All right, so we've established that you're maybe not quite in the headspace to be super excited or looking forward to garden planning right now, but is there anything that when you do start thinking about those things that you get at least a little bit excited for or look forward to?
I am looking forward to the potential of not having to weed as much because I am getting my mulch on the gardens now. Like, last week, I think, I worked on getting a bunch of straw on the beds, and I'm going to start bringing leaves over, getting those on the beds, and then we have the weed fabric for the pathways this year. We're going to do mulch under them and cardboard and everything. Really, really hoping that I don't have to do nearly as much weeding this year, and even if I do, I probably won't, so either way, I think this is a win. I am looking forward to a potentially greater diversity of flowers because I think if I can get the greenhouse up in time, I'll be able to start some more flowers in there like earlier. And then I'm hoping to get some compost in the cottage garden on the areas that I didn't really have time to plant in last year because I got them started. Like, I set the cottage garden up a little too late. I'm hoping to get stuff direct sown out there and let it kind of do its winter sowing stratifying thing. I need to think of other things, so tell me a couple of things you're excited about.
For one, I'm just excited about warmer weather and transporting myself mentally to not days where there's 3 inches of snow on the ground and the low tonight is 7 degrees. I'm just not a winter weather person, and that's okay, but I really, really enjoy it when the weather warms up and I can go outside and be a lizard on a rock and just kind of, bask in the sun and forget my human responsibilities for a minute. So that's the first thing that comes to mind when I start thinking about garden planning is, oh yeah, this coldness and dark is temporary. But also, I'm starting to feel like I am hitting a good rhythm here. Anytime you move to a new garden space, anytime you move to a new state, you have to get used to the rhythms of the weather and the exact spot that you're in and, the limitations and benefits of wherever you're growing. And I finally feel like now that it's been a few years, I have my tools to get stuff done. I have the low tunnels, I have the Agrabah, I have the broad fork, and there's less energy going into guesswork like you were saying before. It's all starting to feel more intuitive. I know the land better. In my mind, the land knows me better, but maybe that's a little woo-woo for people out there.
I would agree. I think that I am also, in general, like on the property, starting to feel that more intuitive sense of like where things should go because they might get flooded somewhere else. And knowing that like I probably shouldn't expect any rain in June. And just like all of these little things that like I couldn't have possibly known before trying and failing, or just experiencing whatever the climate decided to give me that year. So I have like a better idea of just the garden in general and like the property. That made me think of another thing that I'm excited for, and I don't know if it's something that's going to get done this season. I'm really hoping so, but we're going to try and get a water catchment system set up at the top of the garden, so we might be able to store water up there and water the garden a little bit more passively. That would be a really huge thing, especially for June. And then also I kind of am starting to really get to know the varieties that I prefer. There's still some experimenting that we're going to be doing with like trying some new things, but for the most part I'm like, okay, I like I know that I like these specific varieties, and it's not nailed down for everything, but there are a handful of things where I'm like, I'm not changing this. I'm going to just keep buying these seeds every year, or I'm going to save the seeds from these and try and grow them in future years. I'm not going to get into those specific varieties in this episode because I feel like if we start talking about specific seeds, we're going to talk about that for like 3 more hours. But are there any varieties that you're switching up this year, or do you have like your go-tos at this point?
I do feel like I've been sort of whittling them down. As big as my seed binder is, I started with even more so that I could figure out which one is going to become my go-to. So every year I have made some progress in figuring out, like, okay, I really don't like this for XYZ reason, or it just doesn't do well here, and that's okay, but this one does really great, or it's a moderate producer, but I really love the flavor, and so it's worth it to me. I'm just going to plant a bunch of it, that kind of stuff. And so as I went through last night, I was actually able to toss out a lot of older seed packets, things that are going to have a terrible germination rate anyway at this point, but stuff that I just don't want to grow anymore, and it just doesn't need to take up space in my house. So did a little preemptive spring cleaning of my seed organization, but also stuff like tomato varieties. For the paste tomatoes, I don't feel like I've nailed down the specific varieties yet. I love San Marzano. I will always grow some kind of San Marzano, but there's also a bunch out there. It's not just one. So I'm gonna experiment with a new kind of San Marzano this year. Also try a few other kinds of paste tomato varieties because again, I just didn't love the ones that I've done so far. I expanded into new varieties for that last year. Also didn't love those, so it could be an environmental thing. Maybe when I get that high tunnel set up, it'll be great and there won't be any more issues. But also open to just trying some new seeds to mix some stuff up. And then also something that's a little bit different for me now is looking at hybrid varieties. So up until this point, I've been really attached to doing the heirloom seed thing, and 95 to 99% of my stuff is still going to be heirloom, speaking about food specifically. I do like the ability to be able to save that seed and grow the same thing next year, but also there are some things that are just kind of a pain in the butt to save seed from, like broccoli. Like, if I know that I'm gonna go buy that seed anyway because it's not worth the $5 for me to sacrifice that garden space for however long it needs to be to go to seed. It's not something like a tomato where I just kind of have the seed as a byproduct of what I'm eating anyway. Then I'm just gonna make it easier on myself. I'm just gonna get the hybrid seed that is probably gonna have a little bit more vigor because I struggle to grow that stuff anyway. And there are certain places where it makes sense for me to just start looking at hybrid stuff for vigor, and I don't really care if I can't save the seed from it. It's just not a big deal.
So are your paste tomatoes something that you're doing? Are you going to try hybrid for those?
I would have to double check. I don't think so, at least not to this point. If I keep struggling with growing paste tomatoes, then yeah, I'm just gonna say screw it and grow a healthy variety and continue to buy the seed. But because that's something that's relatively easy for me to save the seed from, I'd still like to try the at least open pollinated varieties where I can save that seed, and for how many tomatoes I grow, it can actually end up being a significant amount of money. Yeah, anything I can do to get my seed bill down, I would love to try.
I was just thinking about that because I think that's going to be one of the experiments that I do in my greenhouse. If I grow tomatoes, I wanted to grow. Last year I tried a combo of hybrid and non-hybrid paste tomatoes, and my tomatoes all did horribly last year, but the hybrid ones definitely outpaced the no pun intended. They outpaced the heirlooms. And so I might try and grow both of those again inside and outside the greenhouse just to see how they do. See if the lack of rain makes a difference in there for one or the other. But I feel like I need the control sample of like just putting them both outside as well. And then I'm moving towards hybrid broccoli. That's definitely one of the things that I'm like it's such a weird season here for it anyway, and that's something I haven't nailed down the timing of yet because I don't usually have my shit together in time to get that going as well as like everything else, and then also get it outside on time. Like I can get it going, I can get it started, but then putting it outside when it needs to be. The garden just hasn't been at a point either of the years that I've grown stuff in it by the time those need to go out that like it's ready, because I'm still usually trying to like add mulch, pull weeds from last year. It's a whole thing. This year I'm feeling better about it. It's just dirt because I put my chickens in it and now it's got straw on top of it.
How about the actual physical garden itself going into the 2025 growing season? Are you doing anything different with the actual garden space?
I think we're going to be adding one bed. And by going to be, I mean, it's already kind of added. We had tarps on it all last summer. I just need to get mulch on it. I'm going to be trying to get my mulch on the garden before things start to grow this year, so I don't have to worry about all of the straw sprouting at the same time as all of the weeds are coming up. I'm hoping that if I get the straw on it early enough, the cold will kind of kill back anything that's going to sprout from it. I'm expanding and actually trying to finish the perennial like cottage garden. I was supposed to do that today, but it snowed. So we'll see when I get to it. Something that I changed this fall going into this season was putting the chickens on the garden this fall for like an extended amount of time. Like I just took them off of the garden a couple weeks ago. And I think that's something I'm definitely going to do every year. Like it kind of causes a huge mess with them kicking dirt everywhere into the pathways, but I would much rather just like rake some of that back into the garden beds than have to weed everything at the end of the season. So that's like, I guess that's not like a physical thing, but it's going to be part of the garden flow, I think, for the foreseeable future at least. Other than maybe the rainwater catchment, that's pretty much it. I'm really trying to I really want to nail down like the garden that I have. I want to get the pathways covered up and get control of the Bermuda grass and just be able to try and enjoy the garden and not be stressed out by just the thought of it this year, because last year was a really rough year for the garden for me.
We all have those years.
Watch next year, we're going to have the same conversation.
Don't put that out there, man.
Honestly, I can't remember what we were talking, like what my sentiment or was around it if we had been talking about this last year. So I'm gonna have to go listen to old episodes and see if I can find how I was feeling about the 2023 garden, because this past year just really did me in.
I think we were very optimistic about that gardening season. And then lots of life stuff happened.
But you know what? I have this piece of paper here that is from my like 12 Nights of Yule thing that says my garden is abundant and thriving this year, and I've left this out on the table and the universe told me this is my responsibility. So I feel like I can't fail the universe. Unless it gives me another hurricane, I have to do a good job on the garden this year.
Yeah, I never know if those things are like they're gonna be like a really brutal life lesson, or if that's the universe saying like, no, it'll be great. Because it goes one way or the other, and they are not the same experience.
I feel like this past year was the opposite of whatever I just read. So we're gonna hope that the universe is like, let's be nice to them this year. Let's not give them a hurricane and a drought and hail.
We can hope.
Is there anything you're changing up this year in your gardens?
Nothing Yeah, nothing major. As far as the food garden, actually, as far as the flower garden goes, so that's what's in my front yard. That's what I set up last year. I did a no dig setup. I have the newer laying hens on that right now. So there is nothing growing in there. It's great. I love that. But I also need to move them out of there sooner or later so that they uh don't tear up my flowers and learn that that's their spot. Got to retrain them. But that really doesn't need much of anything. The soil down here, honestly, is a whole lot better than the soil in my food garden. And so, thinking about the food garden, which is the main garden in my mind, I definitely need to focus on getting compost and wood ash on the far side. So my gate is at one end, and the stuff that's closer to the gate gets more TLC because I don't have to move material as far. So the stuff all the way at the end just kind of gets neglected because hauling stuff up there is really tiring. But it's incredibly apparent to me that the things in the far end, that soil is more acidic, that soil has less organic matter, that soil doesn't stay as healthily mulched. And I see it. I see it in the stuff that comes out of there. It's still growing space. I still get food from it. It's just not quite as healthy as it could be. So now that everything else is in a decent enough space for me to start thinking about other things, now I can start thinking about how to improve instead of just kind of treading water with the whole garden thing. So that's been on my mind lately. And then also thinking about what am I going to do for mulch this year? Last year, I had the electric company drop a whole bunch of wood chip mulch in my driveway, which is great. But also, I'm really, really sick of lugging wood chip mulch around because it is very heavy and I do everything by hand, partially because I'm stubborn and partially because I really don't want to compact that soil up there. That's the pasture for the sheep. That's what they eat. And so I don't love the idea of driving my vehicle on it or, that becoming the default. So for me to get wood chips up to the food garden, I have to load up the wheelbarrow and push it up that hill, which, if you are not familiar, it is a beast. And wood chip mulch is heavy, and there's been times where I'm like, am I gonna slide down this hill and pour all of this wood chip mulch on me? I don't know. To this point, I've just embraced it as cardio, and now I'm like, I might just use straw this year because I'm a little bit over it, and that's okay. Finding those places to bend is what's gonna make this whole lifestyle sustainable for me. So looking at bending in that spot for next year. Who knows? Well, this year. Oh man, it's 2025 now. I've got to get used to that. Rough times.
Your 30-year-old body is a little too old to be hauling mulch up that mountain.
You said that multiple times now. I'm starting to get self-conscious about it.
You're the one with the pulled muscle.
Hey, it's getting better.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the one who can't breathe, so I'm...
And then the last thing I've been thinking about is establishing a perennial urban and flower space in the food garden, because I've done this for a few years now. I'm nailing down what's going where, and so I'm confident enough to put like herbs and stuff in the same spot and know that I'm not really going to mess with that because I've moved where I want to put my garlic, which opened up that space. And then I was like, yeah, let's make this a pollinator haven, kind of like an anchor for all of those beneficial insects and things that I want in my food garden.
So are you planning to use like rotten hay, or are you actually going to source straw to get for your garden? Because we got so much organic straw, unsprayed straw, and I thought I was going to use so much of it on the garden, and I don't know if you saw the pictures of it from the other day. All of the beds that I did in my garden, that was with 2 bales of straw. They're really big.
How'd you do that?
I mean, it's like probably 4 to 6 inch deep mulch too. But it was worth it. They were like $8 a bale, I think.
I find that when I mulch things with either hay or straw, which I prefer straw because it has fewer seeds in it, in theory. It's not always the case. I find that when I mulch things with either of those, I need to lay down a thicker layer because in a week or two, it's going to be kind of flattened. It's going to be kind of broken down, whereas wood chips, they'll still do that to some extent, but it's not quite as much. And wood chips will last me a whole season, whereas I might have to reapply straw a few times over. So I have the rotted hay or like discard hay from the run and shed for the sheep because they eat half their hay and then they throw the rest on the floor, which works fine, I guess. It's bedding for them, it keeps them warm. And then I clean it out at the end of the year and I use that half as fertilizer and half as mulch. But I run out of that really quickly, and so I just don't have enough rotted hay around to use on my entire garden. And if I'm gonna source something else, it's gonna be straw. So I'm sure that I'm gonna be buying bales of straw when I go pick up my feed order every other week or so.
I'm excited to see how the straw works because especially when you're like, I don't like to transplant everything. And especially when you're direct sowing stuff, straw is way easier to move out of the way to direct sow things than to wood chips, in my opinion. It doesn't get as mixed into the soil, and I feel like it's not as huge of a deal if it does. Like, it doesn't chunk up your soil as much. And I don't know, I like this is just me thinking aesthetically, but I like how it looks different than what my pathways look like. There's like a variation there, and I can tell distinctively that these are garden beds, these are pathways. I'm excited for that. But I'm also a little bit nervous about the amount of water that it's going to hold around the base of the plants. So we'll see. I'm curious if there's anything that you are doing in particular in your garden planning with food preservation in mind.
It's not something that is at the forefront of my garden planning by any means. I feel like my general approach to it is I'm gonna grow all this food and preserve it to the best of my ability. There's always gonna be stuff that I'll grow that I just can't get to because other things come up as happens in life and it just interrupts. But I did specifically get, I don't remember the exact name, but I did specifically get a particular variety of spicy pepper, which I don't usually grow spicy peppers, but I did get a hot pepper that is some sort of Asian pepper to try to make something along the lines of gochujang. Because I don't really do hot sauce, but I really love gochujang. I put it in a lot of stuff that I cook, especially stir fries and things. I feel like I do miss that flavor when it's not there, and if it's something that I can try to grow and make myself, I'm gonna try to do it. But that is new to me this year. And then what comes to mind again is the paste tomatoes. So not 2024, but 2023, I didn't really think about it, and I kind of just grew half paste tomatoes and half slicing tomatoes. And then I had like a counter overflowing with slicing tomatoes. I was like, what on earth do I do with these? I guess I can them, but then they're like 3/4 water. So I learned my lesson on that. Although my slicing varieties are more productive than my paste tomato varieties, which is kind of backwards. There's only so much I can do with the slicing tomatoes. And so I'm now conscious of that proportionality split. I try to grow maybe 6 to 10 slicing tomatoes and then like 50 paste tomatoes. Just because paste tomatoes are so much easier to can. That's literally what they're for.
But the slicing ones are so pretty.
They are, but one person can only eat so many fresh tomatoes.
I just use them all in sauce. That's my favorite way to eat tomatoes anyway, so on pasta. I think this year there were a couple things that I was wanting to change from last year just because the way we ate changed a little bit this year. And I noticed that we were using a lot of canned green chilies from the store. So I'm going to specifically grow, I think Anaheim chilies is what they are, green Anaheim chilies. And they're like roasted. It's like a blend of a few different kinds, I think, but that was like the main one. And they're like roasted, and I want to can some of those because I have been using them in Red's guacamole recipe a ton. Taylor's obsessed with that. So I'd love to be able to make that with homegrown chilies. It's salsa verde and then canned green chilies and stuff that we put in it sometimes. And then the chili, like the crock pot chili that I made this fall a couple times for us, I use canned green chilies in that, and then a few other things too. So I've been using those a lot this year, and I'm like, I could easily grow those. Why do I not just do that? It's not something that we ever really used a ton before, though, so it didn't cross my mind until this year. And then I think we're also going to try and dedicate more space to popcorn, because I've really been like craving popcorn lately, and I'm like, it'd be cool to have more homegrown popcorn. I successfully grew a little bit, but I want to grow more. And then we're also going to be getting more berry bushes, thinking like a few years out probably, or maybe like 2 years out. I really, really want to be able to preserve homegrown fruit. And Taylor is like a toddler when it comes to berries, and he's obsessed with them. Like, he will eat blackberries until he's sick if you give him the option to. So having fresh blackberries and raspberries would be really, really cool.
I'm curious about your methods. Is there anything methodologically, not that that's a word, that you're changing up looking at this here?
There are a few things. Trying out the straw was kind of one of them. And then the same thing with our pathways. We're using the landscape fabric. But on a greater scale, implementing low tunnels, the like real conduit low tunnels with an actual system and not just the stupid little fiberglass ones that the deer like to break. I'm really hoping that deters the deer this year, and so I can actually grow some green beans. And I think that I want to try and convince Taylor to help me put up some sort of shade structure system ahead of time this year before it gets really hot and dry in June. Like, if we could get it up in May, that would be perfect. I don't know how it's going to work yet, but I really want to get shade cloth over my tomatoes, but be able to easily take it down if I want to. This year, I got desperate and just had to like throw it up and clipped it, tied it to a bunch of the vertical structures in my garden. It worked okay. It wasn't ideal. I couldn't take it down easily, so don't want to do that again, but it helped the tomatoes so much. I think those are the only two things that I'm like changing besides the greenhouse, though.
Watering is what I think of. Granted, last year was both a wetter and a drier year, just at different times. Drier year than usual overall for me. And so up until last year, I have really, really tried to not supplemental water. And I care about it for valid reasons. I mean, I don't want to be pulling more resources than I need to, but also I'm on a well here. It's not like I'm pulling from some unsustainable water source. It's going straight back onto the property that it's come from. And it really, really made a difference with, especially the stuff that's at the far side of the garden that kind of struggles anyway. That's where it made the biggest difference, or at least where I noticed the most difference. So I think going into next year, I'm gonna have less of that mental block to water, but also still not doing it to the point where it's then worth it for me to invest a whole bunch of money in some automatic watering system or soaker hoses or anything like that. Like I'm just gonna take the cheap sprinkler that I got at Lowe's and hook it up to the hose and just leave it there for hours, and that's really it. Nothing high tech.
If editing Sage sees my face looking absolutely startled in that last clip, it's because Buggy just got tangled in my charger cord and my microphone cord, and she ripped my microphone off of the table and almost my laptop too.
And you were having flashbacks to when she
She
broke
really wanted pet.
the charger port. Apparently.
The amount of times my cats have broken my laptops is insane. It's happened probably 4 times, like with 4 different computers. They've
Oh my
broken the
God.
screen on 2, the charger on 1, and something else on another one. I can't remember. I think, they snapped the entire screen off of the keyboard, like at the hinges.
At what point do you just start like Velcroing it down?
The problem is I always sit on the couch, and so I set it in precarious locations.
There we go. Now
I'm the
we get
problem.
the whole story.
It's me. I feel like in the last year of listening to your processes on the podcast, I've heard you deconstruct so many beliefs you've had about gardening in the past. Like, the watering is definitely a big one, and I think the other big one I could think of is like feeling guilty about buying produce from like the farm store or something instead of just like preserving your own and like mixing them together and stuff. So we are growing as humans.
Yeah, I'm sure I'm going to deconstruct even more. But I will say I used not my homegrown tomatoes in a recipe that I put in the freezer, and then I went to thaw it to eat it yesterday, and I was like, this
That's good.
is a bummer. I really don't want to eat this because it doesn't taste as good as what I'm used to because they're tomatoes that I didn't grow. So
It's valid. And
I might
hybrids.
regress on that one.
It's hybrids. That's the other one.
Yes. Which, don't get me wrong, I still love my open pollinated varieties and am disproportionately stocked with them. But yeah. It's progress, little baby steps.
Okay, well, with that being said, what are issues that you've had and things that you're going to try and do to like fix them, remedy them this year? I know we've talked about so many of those over the past year, but there's got to be some that you're specifically addressing.
Yeah, I wouldn't say there's anything that I'm looking at changing that's different from what I've done to this point, but they're definitely things that I have to be on top of in order to have good harvests. So as far as pests go, the squash pests, I mean, how many times do we talk about this? The vine borers, the squash bugs, the squash beetles, those in particular are so, so awful. And I tried the low tunnels combined with the insect netting this last year, and it worked great. Granted, it was a pain in the butt to hand pollinate stuff, and so maybe it's a situation where I just have them covered until they start blooming, or a situation where I just have them covered until the vine borer season is over, and then I just say, good luck, and still plan to succession sow them. But if I don't use those row covers at all, my squash harvest is pitiful. So I have to be mentally on top of that, mentally prepared for that, because it cannot be a situation where I'm like, oh, I'll put it up tomorrow, because that'll become next week and then it's too late. So that's for my summer squash specifically. And then the winter squash, I've noticed that it's absolutely non-negotiable that I have to rotate where I plant that stuff. If I plant pumpkins or butternuts or whatever in the same spot 2 years in a row, they get demolished. And so crop rotation really isn't something that in general I pay attention to, but for that specifically, it's become really important.
I'm doing the same thing as far as crop rotation goes for those specifically. I am going to put some in the same area, but I'm going to switch up what I put there. I think I'm going to do melons instead of the squash, because my melons don't really seem to be affected by them compared to my pumpkins and squash. So I'm going to put my squash, I don't know, I'm going to do like guerrilla squash planting in the garden this year and try and like pop them in random places and mix them around instead of just having a bunch in one spot. I still don't know if that's going to be effective, but something else that I'm going to try to accomplish, especially with having the greenhouse now, I think I'm going to try and start my plants just like a couple weeks ahead of time, which previously I've just done direct sowing because those things pop up so easily. So like I've not seen a point in doing that previously, but I'm thinking if I can get them growing a little bit before I put them in the ground and then cover them, they might have a fighting chance against the bugs. But because they always get like hit with the bugs as soon as they're doing well, you know, like as soon as they're to the point where they're thriving. So I feel like if I can get them in there, trick my squash bugs a little bit, that might help. We'll see.
Yeah, it's like the bugs know. They know when the plants are happy and thriving and like you're just about to get that harvest, and then they just really enjoy messing it all up for you.
And they know that I'm not going to start another secession of them. They know that. They're like, we're going to let her think that she's succeeded. And then tear it all down.
Another pest that I really, really struggle with is flea beetles, and it's disproportionately on my eggplants. Sometimes I'll notice them on something like ground cherries, but oh my gosh, eggplants. It is insane. I can plant my eggplants out, and then the next day they're on them, and the leaves just turn into lace. So for those, at this point, I know that same story as the squash, I immediately have to put the insect netting on it, but that alone actually is not enough. I know that I also have to plant mint next to them, which, yes, I know, if you gasped, you should. I have to plant mint next to them, otherwise they'll go insane. And diatomaceous earth, I guess, is another potential remedy, especially if it's under insect netting and it's not going to affect the pollinators. But it rains so much here that it's not realistic that I'm going to stay perfectly on top of that. And with how quick they are with that damage, it's just not going to work.
I think in general, my approach to the bugs in the garden is hopefully the ecosystem of my garden just gets better as the years go on, like as I'm adding biodiversity and nutrients and all that to it, mulching. So like it's still only going to be in its third year, so I'm not going to let it deter me from continuing to plant my garden. Like I recognize that it'll just keep getting better. But I think that getting the chickens in the garden, and we have our 2 roosters on one of the problematic beds right now, and I'm going to leave them there until I plant in it. And I'm really hoping that that continuous action of doing that helps with the bugs in general.
Yeah, there are some really cool things that happen once you establish what I'll call, I guess, a minimally invasive garden space where you're implementing the no dig, no till methods. You're keeping mulch on it most of the year. You're doing things like putting chickens on it and scratching things up and having all that added to it. And you keep living roots in it. Any or all of that stuff starts doing some really cool things with Brix levels. I think it's BRIX. I could be wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like sugar levels in plants. And that is something that I would love to do some research on. I've even heard of people spraying their plants with a diluted mixture of molasses and water to increase the Brix levels, and that helps them be a lot more naturally pest resistant, because if plants are healthy enough, then they can fight off a lot of even vicious pests.
I just ordered a gallon of molasses from Azure. Maybe I'll try that.
What are you gonna do with a gallon of molasses?
Well, it lasts forever, and I make my own brown sugar whenever I need it. So I'm sick of buying the little tiny jars of it. They're like $5 or $6 for the tiny jars, and the gallon's like $25. So I was like, let's just buy the gallon. Because I always seem to run out of it whenever I want to make gingerbread, and then it's not available because it's the holidays. Also annoyed with that.
Yes.
So in general, looking toward the gardening year, like, what is your general sentiment right now? Like, how are you feeling about it? Are you feeling good about your garden plan?
Whatever I say is gonna be wrong, for how it actually plays out, right? But I'm cautiously optimistic. I've got the greenhouse, which, like we've said 100 times, that's gonna help increase my capacity. It's gonna help with stress and sanity overall. And so I'm cautiously optimistic about this year. I think, barring any unforeseen extenuating circumstances, which those tend to happen, overall, I do think I'm in a good place. You never know what the weather's gonna do. You never know what what you have in store for you, but that's also why we focus on creating resilient gardening systems, because the weather's never going to be perfect. There's always going to be something. So yeah, I'm again cautiously optimistic.
I'm confident that I'm going to get into the groove of things. I'm just not there yet. I'm also cautiously optimistic. And I think that if everything goes to plan, even if it's like delayed plans, like the greenhouse and stuff, I think that it's going to be a good garden year. Like, regardless of the weather and whatever else may happen that we can't control, I think if I can get my shit together and control the things that I can control, it's going to be a good year.
If this conversation has made you all curious about seed starting, what that looks like, what you should know getting into that, or expanding your capacity, we have a whole episode about that you should definitely go take a look at. We'll link that down below for your convenience.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of She Said Homestead. We hope you enjoyed our chat. Before we say goodbye, we'd love to hear from you. Send your homesteading stories to us at shesaidhomestead@gmail.com. We can't wait to share them on the air. To stay connected, follow us on Instagram for updates and sneak peeks at what's coming up next.
If you like video podcasts, make sure you subscribe to the She Said Homestead YouTube channel too. We can't thank you enough for being part of the She Said Homestead community. Until next time, happy homesteading.